Today's guest will be Trevor Treglia, an American composer and synthesist whose work concerns text, microtonality, and alternative notation. Treglia resides in Los Angeles, California, and studies composition and experimental sound practices at California Institute of the Arts. He has produced several albums for the formforum label and most recently Untitled, an album of long-form electronic compositions. Trevor has made several radio appearances on Dublab and 10.as and hosts the monthly radio show No Escape Except Peace on Internet Public Radio and Veneno Radio. My name is Giovanni Grandi and this is Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools. Hello, Trevor. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, great to be here.
I was curious to talk about your album, but first I'd like to hear more about your musical journey and your experience as a musician that led you where you are right now.
Great. Where do I start? I think my first musical experiences was like playing a little bit of violin and a little bit of cello in the in elementary school ensemble, and I quickly dropped that. And then I kind of really fell in love with music being active in the Los Angeles and Orange County punk scene. So that was like a huge revelation to me, for me, going to shows, and then finding and falling in love with the LA noise scene was just kind of my pathway into the kind of stuff that I'm doing now. So I found that, and I feel like it's interesting. I tell people that I have kind of a little bit of a reverse experience. A lot of my friends and colleagues, they start in this more classical field or jazz field, and then they get progressively stranger and stranger. I feel like I started pretty strange and then have been more interested in kind of more tonal music, and then kind of have this reverse thing. But then through being interested in punk music and noise music, I got more interested in things like techno, electronic music, and then that kind of led me to kind of being interested in a lot of the early electronic music, like Eliane, Radigue, and people like that are just incredible and serve as this huge inspiration. Also, on the other end of the spectrum, Harry Parch is kind of revolutionary. I could go on forever with a list of names.
Yeah. And so when did you find that the synthesizer was the instrument you needed? And then the modular synthesizer also?
Modular synthesizer. Well, my first synthesizer was, I had little oscillators, and it's funny because I found myself do this process now of just having an oscillator and a filter and just using the oscillator to just controlling it, pitch on the knob, and then opening the filter, let some sound in, and then just closing it.
Okay.
Layering that, that was my original experience with, and it's so simple. And just recently I found that technique of just manually controlling both of those two parameters of pitch and then of opening and closing a filter is and then going into a DAW and layering that's I think an amazing technique, and I'm really, really fond of that now, and I found myself sort of returning to that. But my first synthesizer was a Korg MS-20 Mini, my first little modular, and that I learned, it just kind of taught me everything, and I just fell in love with that.
I can imagine, because of that interface has also, I think it was originally also designed for educational purposes.
Oh, really?
I think so, because they had a school with the MS-20 back in the 70s. I think they had a school in Japan, or several schools actually, where you could learn synthesizer hands-on. I think there is a video by Alex Ball showcasing the teacher's MS-20, which was blackboard big, and so with those huge knobs, but inside there was just an MS-20. That was like very, and so, yeah. So I'm not surprised that such an instrument was your main gateway into synthesizers.
I wish I still had one, but that's just an amazing instrument. And there's very like so affordable too nowadays. Like I feel compared to other synthesizers, and like it gives you everything in just one little.
What about your musical influences that led you where you are and then carried on your
There's like such a wide array of musical influences that it's hard to just pick one, but like I always deal with it in weeks. Like every week it's
okay.
I focus on. And like right now I mentioned earlier, but like Eliane Radigue has been like somebody that's been really a beacon of inspiration for me. Mainly just her, it's incredibly slow music, a lot of it, but it has this beautiful form of that's just quite inspiring and incredible, and it just blows my mind. And it's just her. I mean, I'm talking mainly about her electronic compositions on her ARP 2500.
Oh yeah.
And then also another revelation that I've had recently is because I've been fortunate to be working on the Surge synthesizer at CalArts, and and it's my first time using that kind of high voltage banana jack, and ever since just working with that, I was like, oh, I mean, I know it's not the same, but having mult cables is also just a revelation for me. Like I can, I can just take one thing. Like when you plug something in, the output doesn't go away; it stays.
Yeah,
and you can. It's like was a revelation. So combining those two things of just having things mapped to one slider in different ways, it's just been like truly a revelation,
yeah, because it might also affect the way you think about patching, because you don't have to. It's more in the moment. It feels like, because you don't have to foresee where you will use that cable, where you will use that output. I mean, I'm not surprised that those synthesizers were mostly used for improvised music, because you have plenty of options always available. I mean, having the output always there, no matter how many cables you pass into that. I mean,
it's totally changed my and it's recent. I was like, okay, I got to get these, I got to do these, and they're and yeah, it's just been it's incredible that the idea that no output ever goes away. It feels like my synthesizer has been multiplied by just continuing multiplying. Changed the way that I've thought about things. So those two things have changed the way that I've been thinking about patching on the modular fundamentally. And through that, I feel like I am thinking a lot about Radigue in the way that and it's funny because she's still with us, but I haven't seen her patch on her synthesizer, so I'm almost just imagining how she would do it.
Yeah, because it was such a unique way of patching that it's almost quite hard to break down into pieces that can be learned and taught and passed on to other generations. So it was like a very almost tailored to herself. It was just such a way of playing rather than composing, which makes it way more personal than other musicians, I think.
Definitely. I think she, like, I saw one video of her, like, she definitely had a plan for every composition. Like she knew where she was going, and there's like this great video of her on, I think I just saw it on YouTube, where you sort of see her and she talks a little bit about how if she messes up, she has to start the tape over because it's just her. And
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
that is so interesting.
And that's where she had to start all over again.
About, like, something that Morton Feldman did is apparently, like, John Cage would go over to his apartment, and Morton would just be on the sheet music paper, just like filling in the staves, and then with no music, just drawing lines basically, and then he'd put the double bar line and be like, "Oh, this is it," and then he'd fill it with music. Like he'd understand how long something would be, and then he'd fill it with music later, which I think it's like you create the vessel,
okay,
in which you just fill, which is so strange, I think, for me, because I can go on a long time, like a really long time. I can, especially with this, things like generative patching, where it's interesting. It just stays, at least to my ears, it stays interesting, and you could go for hours. And you almost have to build this form before. I think that's a great way to like look at it. It's like, this piece will be 7 minutes, or this piece will be 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And then stop. But we're maybe a little unlucky to have this endless, no limitations. You can keep recording for as long as you want.
I think that both approaches can work. I mean, I admire Radigue's approach because she treats the synthesizer as a real instrument, and the tape is just a way to store the music. But the music has been made before reaching the tape. But at the same time, I also admire those composers who just use the synthesizer to create sounds, and then they start composing with the tape. So I think that both can work. I mean, I was more towards Radigue's vision earlier, but as I am now, I've been listening a lot to the Forbidden Planet soundtrack, for example. But also, I heard the Sound on Sound podcast on the Delia Derbyshire archive, where they basically say that the EMS, the VCS3, the first model originally didn't have any controller because it was used to, Tristram Cary, I think, wanted it to just create sounds and record the sounds on tape, and then from the tape onwards, it began like the actual composition.
No, that's so. I think about that a lot too, because they're definitely very different paradigms of the way that we can approach synthesis. Is because there is this, and I don't know if I think I do a little bit of both. Where it's, it's there's something that I do like about thinking about things before. I always think about. Sort of trying to do as much as I can before I hit the mixer. There's so many sound design possibilities that you can do before you hit the mixer, before you add effects. And there's so much that you can do to shape your sound. And then when you hit the mixer, like, I feel like there's this endpoint where it's like the sound it's going out into the world. And considering things happening I try to consider things happening on all these different levels of a composition, where it's like there's things that are happening immediately, and then there's things happening on like a like mezzo middle, like pace, and then the things that are happening on like the more glacial, large structural pace as well. But yeah, it's funny because I find when I am working on these instruments, it's always nice to have this form that's maybe created already, like something like I think we talked about with this patch, this drone that is like I love a drone where you can sort of it does really create this durational thing that is in this form in which you can fill with more music or reduce. It kind of does that job. But dealing with things on, I find that if I am just creating sounds and then organizing them, I tend to get a little lost myself.
Yeah.
Where do these sounds put together, and where do these sounds but if I have something that's like happening on this large long time scale, I find that I have, and that drone can go away or something, but I feel like it's the most comfortable that I am in composing, because I have this thing that grounds me.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
I think you can go either way, and I think it's also good to be really uncomfortable. A lot of the things that I feel like I've been working on now are making me make me uncomfortable.
But yeah, I see that because having, as soon as you start working and arranging your sound like in a sort of post-production kind of way, let it be in a DAW or whatever other device you're using, I mean, you will have endless possibilities. And I tend to be a bit frightened by so many possibilities and tend to get lost, as you said. Because while if you are making your music live and just recording it, you tend to play safer, and you tend to know your limitations and what to do and what not to do. It feels like a more confined horizon, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's the thing. It's like, as composers, musicians, we like have to bring these. It feels like an impossible task because you're right, these endless possibilities, and then you have to bring them into one composition. Especially with the synthesizer, where there's things can happen on every. I'm really inspired by, and we were talking about earlier a little bit. It's just not knowing. Trying to find documentation of what people like Radigue did in the past, like how did she do it? And I was just thinking that I'm so happy and excited about the Alan Strange reissue.
Oh yeah,
because now we know how they did it. At least people, him and then kind of his contemporaries, like we can see like, oh, this is how they were approaching this instrument then, which I think is very helpful. And the thing that I'm so inspired by is like, I think it's just like the first chapter, the first thing is like talking about how, as opposed to more traditional instruments, things like timbre, the volume of the sound, and pitch are all tied together, but in our synthesizers they're all separate.
Yeah, that's that is like Strange's parametric thinking kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's also feels like a revelation. I mean, it's something that I think that a lot of us electronic composers and musicians know instinctively, but really having it be there in plain English, like this is all of these things are separate and you get to decide these connections, is truly like kind of an amazing way to approach working with these instruments.
Which I think it was both harder and easier to approach the synthesizer back then, because you didn't have a lot of documentation, and there was no history in terms of practices and things to do and not to do. But at the same time, you have you got rid very early of the association between note and sound, and the fact that when you play a regular instrument, the act of playing and the note are more or less the same thing, and you squeeze everything together into these musical particles. But with the synthesizer, you can break the atom into smaller particles, and for me, and I think for everyone who starts playing with another kind of synthesizer, like a keyboard one, you still have to go back a bit and and unlearn something when you approach an instrument like the modular synthesizer, where nothing is obvious, as you said.
And I like also just the idea of that with the modular synthesizer and compared to something like a keyboard synthesizer is like, yeah, if the fact that you actually have to plug it in is, there's this act of defining the instrument that has to happen, which that's what David Rosenboom and then now Todd Barton, they talk about how instead of calling things a patch, they're now using the term, and then I think Strange does it too, where they refer to patches, what we call patches, as instrument definitions. But I think is something interesting to think about, because we're really defining we're defining an instrument. We're building an instrument every time that we unplug our synthesizers and then plug them back in. How do we want it to be? How do we want it to sound?
Which I think that, it's a bit of a something that we might have lost along the way with the increase of modules and decrease of modular synth popularity. And we tend to think mostly about modules rather than functions. Because when reading older manuals, first there is the function, and then they name the module, but just if needed. But otherwise, you need an LFO, and then you focus on the LFO. But if it comes from a feedback filter at 10 hertz or an oscillator or a looping envelope, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And I think there's something kind of unfortunate there where, because to me, it feels a little controversial, maybe a little provocative, but there are all these filters and all these different ones, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, to me, the different types of filters sound the same, but something like with Kunsa is like it's a flexible filter. And that I like that about it, where it can be. It's mainly focused on that it is a filter. Its function, rather than it having a particular sound. That's at least that's my interpretation of it. It's not really focused on because with like things like the distortion path on the filter, I don't know what you call it, but
the character knob,
it can turn from a clean filter, like as clean as it can get, and then it can turn into like a wild distorted thing. And I think that that's really elegant, as opposed to having one filter be your nasty distorted filter, and then you have one clean filter. It's like, it's just a function,
Yeah.
We can just use these functions to create our instrument definitions, our patches.
But since you have recently mentioned the instrument definition, I think that we can listen to your patch now and your patch breakdown, or rather your instrument definition.
Great, let's do it. I find drones as a great starting point for my compositional process, as they serve as a canvas in which I can start to write melodies, build textures, or improvise over. For this patch, I am using both of Brenzo's oscillators, which are sequenced and controlled by Usta, Filistri, and Sepel. Recently, I've become more and more interested in exploring microtonal just intonation in my music. Usta offers many different EDOs, scales, and allows you the ability to write your own temperaments. But these days, I've been exploring using Usta's raw voltages instead of the quantized pitch voltages, as raw voltages allow me the ability to play just intervals with greater accuracy than most equal divisions of the octave. This style of sequencing is more reminiscent of old school style sequencers like the Surge TKB touched activated keyboard sequencer, which offers no quantized outputs. I've become more and more fond of this kind of sequencing because it really makes me use my ears. For this drone, I tried to select pitches that had some harmonic relationship to my drone pitch of A. Instead of approaching this as a linear sequence, I decided I wanted a degree of randomness when it comes to which two pitches were played simultaneously. For this, I used Sepel's sample and hold voltages and patched them into Usta in order to modulate the stage shift parameter for the two voices. I also wanted a degree of randomness when it comes to which register each pitch is played in. For this, I combined the outgoing sequence from Usta with the n+1 quantized random voltages using my 333. Sepel's n+1 output is a stepped random voltage quantized to volts. This will make the pitch jump registers at random. I'm using Filistri in LFO mode to send trigger advance signals to Usta and Sepel. Sepel's sample and hold circuit is changing the rate of the two envelopes, which gives this patch its organic and unpredictable form. I'm using these same LFOs to open and close Kuntz's filters in low-pass gate mode, and using Sepel's smooth random voltages to move the voices throughout the stereo field. After developing a drone like this one, my instinct is to record it into Ableton, listen to what I've recorded, and see what's there. Afterwards, I might add a few more voices or work on a transition to another section of the piece.
probably the most striking feature of your instrument is that you use the raw voltages, like a sequence based on raw voltages, which, I mean, now that we talked this much about synthesizer back in like the early days of synthesizer is not surprising, but yeah, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the patch that I've been just working with the Surge recently, and just seeing how they sort of do it. You know, there aren't these quantized, and I was like, how do I, you know? And I love like my, I don't know, it's been a long time, but when I had my Korg MS-20, I had the little sequencer, the SQ1, which is amazing. That's also an amazing little device. And I don't think that had quantized voltages either. And there's something about it, about, you know, I don't have perfect pitch. I, you know, have, I guess, relative, but having to really use your ears.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the patch, that it really forces you to use your ears.
And then be like, oh, does this sound good? You know, does this sound interesting? And then also I've been really, as it's still very new to me, and I don't feel, you know, it's such a vast world, but the world of microtonality and just intonation is just such, I mean, that stuff has been blowing my mind, and I find that with just for me trying to, you know, falling in love with these just intervals, it's hard to replicate that with at least for me. I'm like, well, I want to go for these just intervals instead of doing equal divisions of the octave, which I like equal division of the octave, and I'm in no means you know, I still write some music in 12-tone equal temperament for sure, but you know, if I want to compose a piece using these just intervals, like I want them to be just rather than having it be still an approximation. So
Yeah.
I've just been experimenting with using these raw voltages to approximate these. I mean, you can never really fully get there, but approximate these just intervals and getting things like my harmonic seventh, which is, somebody told me that it's like cheap wine, but I love that sound. I love cheap wine too.
It's like the barbershop dominant seventh. Is that what they called also? Which is like the perfect dominant.
No, it's like the well, I actually don't know, because I don't know that much about the barbershop dominant seventh, but it's
Okay.
but maybe but I know that it's using the interval from the seventh partial,
Okay, I see the seventh overtone, which is like the perfect dominant seventh.
yeah, I think so, yeah. And it's such a strange sound. I mean, when I first heard that sound, it was in Lamont Young's well-tuned piano.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I've lived with that piece for a while now, and it's kind of has come back to me recently with the work that I've been doing now, where it's like my my big project that I've been working on for the past couple months is working with the Yamaha Disclavier. It's like a MIDI player piano. It just
But it's like the player for an acoustic piano, right?
Yeah, for an acoustic piano.
Yeah.
Because I think that a friend of mine had one.
They're really weird. And I've heard, of course, like I know that Aphex Twin, his all of his piano, maybe not all, but some of his more famous piano pieces are all using that Yamaha Disclavier. It's such a strange instrument. It's like in between a piano and a synthesizer, because, you know, we only have, you know, a certain amount of fingers.
Yeah. How is that? How do you call in English that like, I think it was the piano roll. I mean, those like the 1800.
Yeah, like player piano.
Yeah, the player piano, because I was thinking about Conlon Nankaro.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And
I've been
his
thinking
music
about him too, and Tenny, because they both wrote. I mean, I think that Tenny wrote music for Nankaro, and that music it's so. I mean, and I've been thinking about it's Jim Tenney's Spectral Canon for Colin Nankaro, which I have to deal with that piece because I retuned the piano to just intonation. So I'm like, and in that piece, the player piano is like it's retuned to I think the harmonics series, and it's a really weird piece, and the Nankaro stuff is very strange. Really strange. Really weird. So,
but then again, sorry, you are talking about your most recent work on the.
What I've just been experimenting with and writing music for is this just intonated player or I guess player piano, just clavier. And it's strange. I mean, I think I definitely, because it is an acoustic instrument, but it is controlled by like MIDI software. And I think I still approach it with this kind of parametric thinking, you know, because in some ways you can really control, you can fine tune like the velocity of keys and things like that in a way that you can if you're Liszt or just an amazing pianist, like where you can fine tune like what you're playing and bring out certain notes, but I don't have that kind of facility.
But then again, I think that it's all like the more skilled pianist you are, the more your instrument needs to be like top notch in order to let you take advantage of all those nuances. And then again, I think there is this kind of symbiotic relationship between you and your instrument, where you somehow develop also your style according to the instrument you're playing, to some extent, of course, because professional pianists are capable of getting more or less the same sound out of various different instruments, but something like that.
No, definitely. I mean, I'm so amazed by these. Just there's some amazing performers out there, especially with the piano. With the piano.
And just out of curiosity, the first Untitled track of your latest Untitled album that features a piano, how was that recorded? Was that already?
That's me playing, but
okay, so it's you.
It's just me, but it's digital, or it's like I used a VST piano. I played it on my keyboard.
Okay.
I have a electric piano, and I just recorded it. But yeah, it's me playing that, and it's some funny field recordings.
Wow, nice. So you kind of reversed your approach, going from like using a controller, like a physical controller, like playing as like a piano, but on a computer, and now you're using a computer to play on an actual piano.
I haven't thought of that exactly. Yeah, no, that's funny. I did. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, this also is. I think that not thinking about everything in advance is also good, because I mean you are trusting your guts, which is probably one of the most important things as an artist.
Yeah, totally. And it's fun to be surprised a little bit, where it was like, oh, I did that. Something that I always, I think a lot of us, people that produce and make stuff, it's like you'll make a patch or you'll do something, and then you wake up the next day and you listen to it and you're like, oh man, this is terrible. It's just awful.
Yeah.
And then maybe you let it go, and then you return to it in like a month, and you're like, who made this? Like,
yeah, true.
Yeah, I always think about it, like the person that sets the alarm. Like for me, every morning there's somebody that has to turn on the alarm for the next day. That's not the same person that wakes up in the morning. Because when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, who set this alarm?
Well, that is also why the ancient Roman poet like Horace, in his Ars Poetica, which is a long poem in form of a letter talking about the art of poetry as a whole. He says that a true poet should, after they have finished their composition, they should let it aside for 9 years. And then after 9 years, you can evaluate if that's good or not. Of course, that was like an exaggeration, but the point is that you need to step off the role of the creator to judge your work as a listener also.
Totally. I mean, like they feel so separate, like the part of me that creates and the part of me that and then we can like loop that into things like sound design, like we were talking about earlier, is making a lot of people, they'll make a bunch of sounds and then they'll come back to it and then compose later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you gotta like give things some time, because the person that creates the sound and the person that judges is just so different,
Yeah, and also the thing that makes it hard to work with pre-recorded material is that you need to be a very patient listener and not to skip to the good part, to what you remember it was a good part, because it's a very time-consuming process, that one, but very, very rewarding.
Definitely. And I think about, it reminds me of Pauline Oliveros, which is like getting you in that state of like really listening to your environment and being really present is really for me, my it's hard to approach that. But when I get in that state of just listening and exploring, especially on the synthesizer too, because there's this wide range of timbres and just beautiful colors that you can create with it, where but you have to just sit there and be patient.
And sometimes you need also the proper environment. I remember, since we mentioned John Cage for a bit earlier, last year I went to Halberstadt in Germany, where there is the John Cage organ project, where they are playing as slow as possible.
The long time.
For 639 years. And
did you hear it change?
No, I was there just I think that the next change is this February. I think next February 24.
We have to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if you're allowed to cheer when it happens, because I feel like
I think that there are quite a lot of people in there. I mean, there is the mayor and some. I mean, it's like some sort of an event, I think. And it really forces you to listen very deeply to the environment and the sound, because that's basically there is just a tone, but knowing that is part of a piece somehow makes you listen to that differently.
No, totally. I mean, there is some way of thinking about. I think a lot of music is really focused on where the voices are moving and not so much where the voices just are.
True.
Yeah, it's just, and I think that there's something that I like about this slow music, maybe not as slow as the Cage, but like this slow music where you can just listen to where things are, because sound, it's beautiful. And especially when you start to think about things like, like in the harmonic series, where it was like blew my mind, where it's like, oh, in every musical tone there is present many tones. So you can think about every tone as like a sort of chord, and an interesting one, because you have the major third, the fifth, and it goes on forever, and it makes me, you know, want to sort of explore that more, where you're like really just present and listen to where things are, what sound is, instead of like where it all is going. Which I think I mean, things like counterpoint have been really it's really cool stuff. But I think when we slow it down, there's like this presence that hopefully you can get, and this awareness. So I'd love to see that Cage piece. It's really incredible, and he's you know, I wrestle with him as a composer. I think that a lot of people do, and his thing that really inspires me is that he says that as a composer, he's shifted his responsibility from sort of, I think it's like providing answers to asking questions. And I just love that. I just love that. And there's this art of, or this way of like exploring the world around us, our musical material, that is not really, you know, providing these answers. As like, you know, I'm not one of those composers that would like stand in front of like another performer and just be like, no, that's not the music. Because I don't know, just maybe just not, I don't feel qualified, really. Like,
I think that it's like it's a very childish approach in a good way. The like Cage's approach was saying that anything can possibly can potentially be music, which of course opens the door to. I mean, it can be. It can be a very dangerous zone, because if really everything can be music, also music, where is it? I mean, if it's everywhere, it's almost like it's anywhere. It's not like in no specific place. But at the same time, I think that again, he wasn't trying to provide an answer there, but rather suggesting a question.
I think that that's great. And there's something like, yeah, where is music is something that I think about. There's something that I really love, like one of these old forms is that I really feel really drawn to and want to eventually really work in is art song. Just the act of setting taking a text from somewhere and then setting it to music, and I guess like the more kind of naive interpretation of like what that is you take a text and then you find the music, and you bring the music out of it. And I've been kind of doing these little experiments with just trying to set text, and I find that like some of these texts that I've been dealing with, there's a possibility that some of it might have too much music in it.
But which kind of text, for example?
I mean, I
prose
had
or
this
poetry?
revelation. I was just reading Rilke, where I was like, oh, there's a little bit too much music in this. I don't know how I set this. I feel more comfortable setting things like, I think about Robert Ashley, who his text is for his the librettos for his experimental operas are beautiful and profound, but also very dry. And it's almost like, I mean, that guy could set, or you could set the phone book, and which would be a little bit more comfortable than setting something that is like these amazing poets. It's like,
yeah, I see. But at the same time, most of I feel like most of the recent poetry has a sort of I'm talking about like the 20th century onwards, has a very weird sense of rhythm, so to speak, and almost absent, which might reflect also what you said earlier about not caring about where to go, but caring where you are. Because, of course, classical poetry and Renaissance poetry and so on had a very clear rhythmic structure that could I like it a lot, and you could really boil everything down to the meter, and everything was crystal clear in that regard. But then again, it was a sense of perpetual motion leading you from a place to another, almost like dancing. You cannot like freeze while you dance, because you probably you won't be balanced over that kind of moment.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think about my relationship to, one of my, should I say this, but my relationship to rhythm is so abstract. Like I love rhythmic music, but I find that I'm not so driven to make rhythmic music. So I think I'm more attracted to these sort of looser, more abstract forms. Like I think about Feldman, where he'd have people be playing in all these different time signatures, and they only come together at the end. And these big, just masses of things phasing, and that's something you can talk about. Something that's really attractive about using Usta as a sequencer is that it's not so tied to the downbeat. Called it the tyranny of the bar line. Was it? I forget who says that.
Yeah, but I cannot pinpoint the exact source right now. But it was a very common tendency over the 20th century, I think, and maybe even earlier.
But I love techno, which is very on the grid. Like that can be great. But it's usually on the grid, and then there's this abstract thing.
Yeah, I was about to mention that, because it's not like you have a discernible structure like A B on a techno piece.
Yeah, like I love one of the classics is Gas, like his work. I don't know his name, but he just has a pulsing rhythm. And then above it is just a beautiful, more ambient structure that floats above the track. Yeah, that stuff I'm just so attracted to.
And because in your patch you used modulated LFO as a clock, right? Also to avoid this idea of structure.
Yeah, and and that's really taken from the Todd Barton Krell patch.
Yeah, the crowd patch, yeah.
Which is also a revelation, where you think that technique, I use it in a lot of the things that I do, where you can just have these big structures, but then also tying it into using a sequencer. So I don't know, I love that thing. So in that patch, just basically what the sequencer did was just selected pitches in which we can choose from, because it's also not tied to, it's not a linear sequence. Everything is related to each other. I think that in that patch, everything is just tied to the harmonic series of A, or loosely.
And also I like the fact that you use the N+1 voltage to shift to one of the two voices.
Oh, that's, I use that in everything.
Yeah, because that is also what tricks your brain. Because if your interval, the overtone is ignored, it is blend with the root note with the fundamental frequency only if it is at a specific position. The moment you transpose it up or down and change the amplitude, it becomes a chord. So it's like playing on the verge between timbre and chords.
Sure, I think about that a lot, and when I'm putting in more notes, is where a note is positioned. This vertical space is like so important, and it's so different where you place it, because things aren't present in in this. It's like loosely based, but if you transpose one of these like harmonics or one of partials, and if you transpose it up, it might not be in the bass note of like A's harmonic series anymore. It might be somewhere else, because and I think that's something interesting to explore.
Okay, so Trevor, this conversation has been very inspiring, has led us to some unforeseen territories, and I really can't wait to try and put some of these ideas into practice in studio and make a patch in the style of Trevor Treglia that I will put after this episode as usual. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to ask you a question that I asked also to our previous guest, Francesco Gennari, which is if you could choose the next Frap Tools module, the modules that don't exist, what would it be?
Recently, I've been falling in love working with the Surge. I really love their module, which is an analog shift register, which is just sends. It's like a relay where it just sends. You send the signal in, and then it sends it out, and then when you send the next signal, it just goes down. So you can make these beautiful patterns, like attaching like volt per octave to. I mean, the tuning on the Surge one isn't, so it gets a little squirrely and strange.
Which also explains the unquantized sequencer, because if you don't have a standard to conform to, basically everything, if nothing is in tune, also everything is in tune.
Yeah, exactly. But I love that idea of just being able to create patterns from just one sequence, and just these beautiful patterns that create this just gorgeous patterns. So I'd love to see that. And maybe combined with, I don't know, just some CV control, more CV control. I can never get enough. I need all the CV control.
Like CV control, like CV generators, or like in tactile interface.
I would like to have what do they call it? A sequential switch kind of thing.
Like a multiplexer.
Yeah. Like that combined with one of these like shift register things. I want to just send. I think that those are great.
Basically, yes, sending CV to as many points as possible in as many ways.
Some more processing of CV, because there's so much that can happen. Like I love this idea of just, as we were saying earlier, is just everything, doing as much as you can before the mixer, where you are just all these processing and sending CV everywhere. I would just love to see more CV stuff.
Yeah, it's also a huge. It allows you to have more rules in your instrument definition, so you can define more parameters to edit in using strangest word.
Yeah, no, I love that. That idea of instrument definitions too is like. It's a good way to think about things.
Yeah, we might put that in the in the episode title. So, but yeah, that was a bit like an unexpected request, but very very interesting. And so thank you very much for suggesting it.
What was the last module request from the last podcast?
Francesco talked about a wave shaper. Asked for a wave shaper, because he's also is using a lot of the Serge, the wave multiplier, and it's actually quite interesting because he was very much into counterpoint, and he is very much into the movement. So we have two very opposite approaches, and he uses the wave folders to add different textures to the voices and make them stand out more or less, and use the timbre as a musical parameter to be sequenced, just as pitched.
That's an interesting approach, because with timbre changes you can make all your counterpoint voices stick out for sure. So you can maybe do some parallel fits.
Okay, so thank you again very, very much for staying with us, Trevor. As I said in the introduction, Trevor's last album, the Untitled, is available on Bandcamp. I will put the link in the episode description for everybody to check out. And we will meet soon in Frap Tools studio to create a patch inspired by Trevor Treglia's Inside. Thanks again for staying with us, Trevor.
Thanks so much.
Hello again, Giovanni here at Frap Tools. The interview is over, and I took some time to understand Trevor's patch and get together all the inspiring ideas we shared in our conversation. And this is the patch I came up with. The patch consists of two voices, played by Brainsaw's yellow and green oscillators respectively. The green one plays a steady drone. Its sawtooth output feeds Kunsa's filter 3 and 4, set to low pass and band pass respectively. Their cutoff frequency is modulated by a Falistri generator set to loop mode, with a speed randomization from Sapel. The yellow oscillator provides the second voice, and it is a bit more complicated. The final output feeds Kunsa's filter 1 with a very high Q setting. The low-pass output then goes into filter 2's input, which has no Q and a generous character setting. Filter 1's purpose is to emphasize certain overtones of the yellow oscillator, while filter 2 provides a slower modulation over the final sound. The filter 2 low-pass output then goes into Fumana, whose odd and even bands output feed the left and right inputs of a quad stereo channel. This is my choice for spatializing the sound instead of modulating the pan pot as in Trevor's patch. A slow raw voltage sequence from the Usta sequencer changes the yellow oscillator's pitch, while a faster one, still with raw voltages, changes the filter 1's cutoff frequency to select only specific overtones. To ensure that the overtones match the fundamental, the first sequence, the one that controls Brainsaw's yellow oscillator, is duplicated and one copy is summed to the second sequence, the one that controls the filter. The sequencer is driven by a looping Falistri who at the same time controls the cutoff frequency of the filter 2 and triggers both Sapel's generators. Sapel's random values modify the speed of both Falistri's LFOs, the one controlling filters 3 and 4 and the one that moves the sequence, and they also perform a stage shift over the overtone sequence, thus causing a random overtone pattern. Other modulation sources like random voltages and LFOs controls various timbral parameters on the Brainsaw. At the end, a shimmer reverb emphasizes the overtones. The combination of fundamental frequency and overtone determines the stereo placement of the largest part of the sound, according to the band of Fumana where they will end up to. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you want to learn more, you can follow the link in the episode description. My name is Giovanni Grandi, and this was Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.